The first light of dawn barely touched the London skyline when Thomas Whitfield's weathered hands pushed open the service entrance of Harrison's department store. At 58, his body carried the weight of 20 years of grief and 15 years of scrubbing floors, yet his steps remained steady, purposeful. The November cold bit through his thin janitor's uniform, the same one he'd worn for 3 years, its fabric worn soft from countless washes, the Harrison's maintenance embroidered logo fading like a ghost of its former self. Inside, the store slept in elegant silence. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen fireworks above the polished marble floors that Thomas knew more intimately than most people knew their own homes. Every scratch, every stubborn stain, every corner where dust tried to hide, he knew them all. His mop bucket rolled across the floor with a familiar squeak that had become his morning song, a rhythm that helped him remember why he was here. Thomas paused at the perfume counter, his reflection caught in the pristine glass. The man staring back looked older than his years, silver hair neatly combed despite no one being there to see it. His uniform hung loose on his frame. He'd lost weight since Margaret died, never quite regaining his appetite for life's simple pleasures. But his eyes, brown and deep, held something his appearance couldn't betray, a secret that would have shocked everyone who dismissed him as just another invisible service worker. "Morning, Mr. Whitfield," called out Marcus, the security guard, the only other soul in the building at this hour. Marcus was one of the few who bothered to learn his name, who saw him as more than a ghost pushing a mop. "Morning, Marcus. How's your daughter's university applications coming along?" Thomas asked, genuinely interested. He remembered everything about the people who showed him kindness. It was a short list. "She got into Imperial College," Marcus beamed. "Engineering just like she wanted. That's wonderful. You must be proud." Thomas's smile was warm, but tinged with something Marcus couldn't quite place. A father's understanding of dreams deferred and sacrifices made. As Thomas began his routine, starting with the luxury goods section, his mind wandered to his own daughter, Emma. She was in her final year at medical school now, believing her scholarships and part-time work were paying her way. She didn't know about the investment properties in Bermondsey, the portfolio in Canary Wharf, or the savings account that had grown steadily for 2 decades. She didn't know that every floor he mopped, every toilet he cleaned, was a love letter to her future. The store began to wake around him. Lights flickered on, department by department, and the first employees trickled in through the main entrance. Thomas watched them from his position on his knees, scrubbing a particularly stubborn mark near the jewelry counter. They walked past him as if he were part of the architecture, their heels clicking importantly on his freshly cleaned floors, leaving prints he would clean again tomorrow. Sarah Mitchell arrived at 8:30 sharp, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her makeup impeccable despite the early hour. At 23, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who believed the world owed her something better than her current station. Her eyes, blue and sharp, scanned the store like a predator seeking prey, wealthy customers to charm, colleagues to compete with, and those beneath her to remind herself she was climbing upward. Thomas had watched her for 2 years now, seen how she laughed too loudly at the jokes of men in expensive suits, how her smile never quite reached her eyes unless she was counting commission. He'd heard her on the phone during breaks, complaining to friends about working in retail, about how she was meant for better things, how it was just temporary until she married someone who could give her the life she deserved. "Oh God, Thomas, you're dripping on the Carrara marble," Sarah's voice cut through his thoughts. She stood above him, her nose wrinkled in disgust. "Don't you have any proper uniform to wear? That thing looks like it belongs in a museum of poverty." Thomas looked down at the small water stain spreading from his bucket. In his contemplation, he'd let it overflow slightly. "I'm sorry, Miss Mitchell. I'll clean it right away. You better. Some of us are trying to maintain standards here." She stepped deliberately around him, her heel catching the edge of his bucket, tilting it further. More water spilled across the floor. "Oh, look what you've done now. How do they even keep someone so careless employed here?" Thomas said nothing, just began soaking up the water with his mop. He'd learned long ago that dignity wasn't about defending yourself against every slight. It was about knowing your worth regardless of what others thought. As Sarah walked away, her laughter tinkling like broken glass, Thomas continued his work. In his pocket, his phone vibrated with a message from his investment banker. "The Harrisons acquisition is ready for your final approval. Just say the word." Saturday arrived with unusual November warmth that drew crowds to Knightsbridge like moths to flame. Harrison's department store hummed with the energy of weekend shoppers, their voices creating a symphony of privilege that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. Thomas had been working since 4 in the morning, preparing the floors for the onslaught of designer shoes and shopping bags that would traverse them throughout the day. By noon, exhaustion pulled at his shoulders. He'd already cleaned up 3 coffee spills, 2 broken perfume bottles, and countless muddy footprints from the unexpected morning rain. His uniform, already showing its age, now bore the battle scars of his labor. Streaks of cleaning solution, spots of coffee, and the general dishevelment that came from hours of physical work. He was refilling his cleaning cart near the luxury handbag section when disaster struck. The industrial-size bottle of cleaning solution, its cap worn loose from years of use, slipped from his tired hands. The chemical cascade seemed to happen in slow motion, the blue liquid splashing across his chest, down his trousers, soaking through the thin fabric instantly. The sharp ammonia smell filled the air, making his eyes water. "Oh my God!" Sarah's voice rang out like a bell of judgment. She stood at her register, a customer's credit card frozen in her hand, her face a mask of delighted disgust. "Thomas, what have you done to yourself now?" The store seemed to pause, shoppers turning to locate the source of the commotion. Thomas stood there, dripping, the chemical smell emanating from him like a cloud of shame. His uniform, already worn, now clung to him transparently in places, revealing the white undershirt beneath, itself yellowed with age. Sarah's laughter started as a giggle, but grew into something crueler. "Ladies and gentlemen, I present Harrison's finest, looking like he's been swimming in a toilet bowl." She addressed the gathering crowd like a carnival barker, her voice carrying across the floor. "This is what happens when you shop at Oxfam and work at Harrison's." A few customers laughed nervously, uncomfortable but drawn to the spectacle. Others looked away, second-hand embarrassment coloring their cheeks. A young child pointed, asking his mother loudly, "Why does that man look so sad and dirty?" Thomas felt something crack inside him, not break, but crack, like ice beginning to thaw. 20 years of grief, 15 years of invisibility, countless moments of swallowed pride, all condensed into this single moment of public humiliation. His hands trembled as he tried to wring out his shirt, the solution still dripping onto the marble floor he'd polished to perfection just hours before. "Sarah, please," he said quietly, his voice barely audible above the store's ambient music. "Please what?" She stepped out from behind her counter, emboldened by her audience. "Please stop telling the truth. Look at you, Thomas. You're a walking advertisement for failure. How do you even show your face here every day looking like that? Don't you have any self-respect?" Mrs. Pemberton, an elderly, regular customer, intervened softly. "Dear, perhaps that's enough." "Oh, Mrs. Pemberton, I'm just saying what everyone's thinking," Sarah interrupted, her voice honey-sweet but poisonous. "I mean, this is Harrison's. We have standards. Our customers shouldn't have to see this." She gestured at Thomas as if he were a stain she was pointing out to housekeeping. Thomas watched his reflection in the polished brass of a nearby fixture, distorted, broken into fragments, unrecognizable. For a moment, he saw himself as they saw him, old, poor, irrelevant. Then beneath that image, he saw something else. Margaret's face on their wedding day, Emma's smile at her university acceptance, the portfolio of properties that bore his name, the bank statements that told a different story than his appearance. "You're absolutely right, Miss Mitchell," Thomas said, his voice steady now, finding strength in depth she couldn't imagine. "I am exactly what I appear to be, A janitor in old clothes, cleaning up after people who believe their worth is measured by their appearance. Sarah's smile faltered slightly at his composure. She'd expected anger, shame, perhaps tears. Not this quiet dignity that made her cruelty seem smaller somehow. Mr. Harrison himself appeared then, drawn by the commotion. The store's elderly owner, impeccably dressed in Savile Row tailoring, surveyed the scene with tired eyes. "What's happening here?" "Thomas had a little accident," Sarah said quickly, her tone shifting to professional concern. "I was just suggesting he might want to go home and change." Mr. Harrison looked at Thomas, taking in his soaked uniform, the puddle at his feet, the crowd of gawking customers. "Thomas, take the rest of the day. We'll discuss this on Monday." As Thomas walked toward the service exit, his soggy shoes squeaking against the marble, he heard Sarah's voice one more time, stage whispering to a customer, "Between you and me, I don't know why Mr. Harrison keeps him on. Charity case, probably. Some people just don't know when they don't belong." Thomas paused at the door, his hand on the handle. He turned back, meeting Sarah's eyes across the gleaming expanse of the store. "Miss Mitchell, you're right. Some people don't know where they belong. But sometimes belonging is about more than appearances. Sometimes it's about remembering why you're here in the first place." He left then, walking into the afternoon sun, his phone already in his hand. "Mr. Blackwood, yes, it's Thomas Whitfield, about the Harrisons' acquisition. I'm ready to proceed. Monday morning, as we discussed." Sunday evening found Thomas in his modest flat in Suffolk, surrounded by documents that told a story no one at Harrison's could have imagined. The walls, painted a fading cream, bore only 3 decorations: a photograph of Margaret on their wedding day, Emma's graduation portrait, and a framed first-pound note, the first profit from his property investments, earned 18 years ago. Emma sat across from him at the small kitchen table, her medical textbooks pushed aside for their weekly dinner. She'd insisted on cooking, filling the flat with the aroma of shepherd's pie, Margaret's recipe, though neither of them mentioned that. They never did anymore. Some griefs became part of the architecture of life, acknowledged in silence rather than words. "Dad, you look tired," Emma observed, studying him with the clinical eye she was developing at medical school. "More than usual." "Are you taking your blood pressure medication?" Thomas smiled at his daughter's concern. She had her mother's heart, always worried about others, always caring. "I'm fine, love. Just a long week at work." "I still don't understand why you push yourself so hard," Emma said, serving him a generous portion. "You could retire, take it easy. I'll be qualified soon, and I can take care of you for a change." If only she knew, Thomas thought, that he could buy the entire building her medical school operated in. But that wasn't the point. It had never been the point. After Margaret's death, when Emma was only 8, he'd made a decision. She would never feel the weight of money, neither its absence nor its abundance. She would make her own way, build her own strength, become her own person, without the corruption that he'd seen wealth bring to so many at Harrison's. "Your mother used to shop at Harrison's," Thomas said suddenly, surprising himself with the admission. "Before you were born, when we were first married, she'd save up for months just to buy one small thing, a scarf, a pair of gloves. She said it made her feel like she was part of something beautiful." Emma's eyes softened. "You never talk about her there." "She died on her way back from Harrison's," Thomas continued, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "She'd bought me a tie for our anniversary. They found it in the bag, still wrapped at the accident scene. It's why I started working there, to be close to her last happy place." "Dad!" Emma reached across the table, covering his weathered hand with her smooth one. "But over the years, I watched that place change. It stopped being about beauty and became about exclusion, about making people feel small if they couldn't afford to belong. Your mother would have hated what it's become." His phone buzzed. Another message from Blackwood. "Final papers ready. Harrison's board has accepted your offer. Announcement Monday, 9 a.m. "Who keeps texting you?" Emma asked, noticing his distraction. "Just work things," Thomas said. which was true in a way she couldn't understand. Tomorrow, he would become the owner of Harrison's department store. Tomorrow, everything would change. But tonight, he was just a father having dinner with his daughter, holding on to these last moments of simplicity. After Emma left, promising to study for her upcoming exams, Thomas sat alone in his flat, surrounded by the evidence of his secret life. Bank statements showing millions in assets, property deeds for buildings across London, investment portfolios that had grown beyond his wildest dreams, all built slowly, carefully, one sacrifice at a time. He pulled out a worn notebook, Margaret's diary from their last year together. Her handwriting, looping and optimistic, filled the pages with dreams. Thomas will be successful one day. Not rich, necessarily, but successful in ways that matter. He'll make sure Emma never wants for anything, but more importantly, he'll teach her the value of everything. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd become wealthy beyond Margaret's imagination, but he'd hidden it all, playing the role of the struggling janitor, accepting humiliation after humiliation. Why? The answer came in Margaret's words, written just days before her death. True character is revealed not when you have nothing, but when you have everything, and choose to see everyone as equal anyway. Tomorrow, he would reveal everything. But would it be revelation or revenge? As he prepared for bed in his modest bedroom, Thomas caught his reflection in the mirror. The man staring back looked tired. Yes, but also resolved. He thought of Sarah's cruel laughter, her voice calling him a charity case, a failure, someone who didn't belong. "You're right, Sarah," he whispered to his reflection. "I don't belong in your version of Harrison's. But tomorrow, you'll discover you don't belong in mine either." Yet even as anger flickered in his chest, Margaret's voice echoed in his memory. "Hatred is just love that's been hurt too much, Thomas. Don't let pain turn your love into something ugly." He opened his closet, where 5 identical janitor uniforms hung neatly. Tomorrow he would wear one for the last time. Or perhaps, he thought, remembering Margaret's love for the store's original beauty, he would wear it differently, not as a uniform of servitude, but as a reminder of who he chose to be when he could have chosen to be anyone. Monday morning arrived wrapped in typical London fog. The city's skyline dissolved into grey, watercolor impressions. Thomas stood outside Harrison's department store at 8:45 a.m., wearing his janitor's uniform one final time, but now it felt different on his shoulders, like armor rather than shame. In 15 minutes, everything would change. Inside, the store buzzed with unusual energy. Mr. Harrison had called an all-staff meeting, unprecedented for a Monday morning. Employees clustered in nervous groups, speculation running wild. Sarah held court near the jewelry counter, her voice carrying over the anxious murmur. "I heard we're being bought by some Chinese conglomerate," she announced with authority she didn't possess. "They'll probably fire half of us. Though honestly, they should start with the cleaning staff. We're terribly overstaffed in that department." Her eyes found Thomas entering through the service door, and her smile sharpened. "Speaking of which, look who's here." "Thomas, didn't Mr. Harrison tell you to stay home? Or did you forget that along with forgetting to buy decent clothes?" Thomas walked past her without acknowledgement, taking his position with the maintenance staff. Marcus, the security guard, nodded at him with concern. "You all right, Mr. Whitfield? Heard about Saturday?" "Never better, Marcus," Thomas replied, and meant it. Mr. Harrison appeared on the marble staircase, his face drawn with exhaustion and something that looked like relief. Beside him stood James Blackwood, Thomas's lawyer, though no one recognized him in his expensive suit among the sea of similar expensive suits. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Harrison began, his voice wavering slightly. "As many of you have suspected, Harrison's has been facing financial difficulties, the rise of online shopping, changing consumer habits, and, frankly, our failure to evolve with the times has brought us to a crossroads." Sarah's confident expression began to falter. This affected her directly. Her dreams of marrying wealthy depended on maintaining her position among the wealthy. "However," Mr. Harrison continued, I'm pleased to announce that Harrison's has been acquired by someone who understands its true value, someone who sees beyond profit margins to what this store once meant to London, to families, to the community. Blackwood stepped forward. The new owner has asked me to read a prepared statement. He unfolded a paper, clearing his throat. Harrison's was once a place where anyone could experience beauty, where a shopgirl saving for months could buy something that made her feel special, where quality meant more than exclusivity. That Harrison's died slowly, replaced by something cold, something that measured worth in price tags and treated human dignity as a luxury item. Sarah laughed nervously. What is this, some kind of socialist manifesto? Blackwood continued, unperturbed. The new owner has worked in this store for 15 years. He has seen its best and worst. He has cleaned your floors, emptied your bins, and watched as the culture of kindness was replaced by a culture of cruelty. A ripple of confusion passed through the crowd. Someone from the cleaning staff owned the store. The new owner, Blackwood said, his eyes finding Thomas in the crowd, is Mr. Thomas Whitfield. The silence that followed was complete, as if the entire store had suddenly been vacuum sealed. Every head turned toward Thomas, who stood quietly among the maintenance staff, his worn uniform suddenly seeming like a costume, a disguise that had fooled them all. Sarah's face went through a spectrum of emotions: confusion, disbelief, horror, and finally, a dawning comprehension that drained all color from her cheeks. That's impossible. He's a janitor. He's nobody. He's your new employer, Blackwood said simply. Thomas stepped forward, each footstep echoing in the silence. He walked past Sarah, whose mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. He climbed the marble stairs, joining Mr. Harrison and Blackwood. When he turned to face his employees, his voice was calm, clear, and carried an authority no one had ever heard from him before. My wife Margaret died 20 years ago. She was walking home from this store, having bought me an anniversary gift she'd saved 6 months to afford. That tie was never worn. It sits in my drawer, still in its Harrison's wrapping, a reminder of her last happy day. Emma appeared at the store entrance, having received his message to come. She stood frozen, staring at her father, as if seeing him for the first time. I started working here to be close to her memory, Thomas continued. But I stayed for a different reason. I stayed to watch what we do to each other when we think no one important is looking. I stayed to see who showed kindness to someone they thought beneath them, and who used their position to make others feel small. His eyes found Sarah, who seemed to be shrinking into herself. Miss Mitchell, on Saturday you told me I didn't belong here. You were right. The person I appeared to be didn't belong in your version of Harrison's, a version built on cruelty, superficiality, and the belief that wealth determines worth. Sarah's voice came out as a whisper. I didn't know. That's exactly the point, Thomas said. You didn't know, so you showed me exactly who you are. All of you did. Marcus, he looked at the security guard, you showed me kindness. Mrs. Chen from the food court, you always saved me a sandwich when you knew I'd worked through lunch. James from receiving, you helped me carry heavy loads without being asked. He paused, his voice growing stronger. But so many of you walked past me like I was furniture. Worse than furniture, because at least you're careful not to damage the fixtures. You left messes for me to clean with sneers of disgust. You spoke about me as if I couldn't hear, as if being poor made me deaf as well as worthless. What are you going to do? Someone called out. Fire us all? Thomas smiled then, and it transformed his face. No, I'm going to do something much harder. We're going to rebuild Harrison's into what it should have been all along. The executive conference room on the 5th floor had never seen Thomas Whitfield before, except when he'd cleaned it after hours. Now he sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, still wearing his janitor's uniform, facing the department heads who'd barely acknowledged his existence for 15 years. Sarah sat at the far end, her usual confidence shattered, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her palms. She'd tried to leave after the announcement, but Blackwood had informed all senior staff that attendance at this meeting was mandatory. I want to tell you all a story, Thomas began, his weathered hands flat on the table. Not about Saturday's humiliation, though that was simply the final straw. I want to tell you about Mrs. Henderson. Several people shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Henderson had been a cleaner who'd worked alongside Thomas 5 years ago. Mrs. Henderson's grandson needed surgery. She came to management begging for an advance on her salary or a loan. She was told that Harrison's wasn't a charity. She was told to try the benefits office. She was told, Miss Mitchell, by you specifically, that perhaps she should have thought about medical expenses before having children she couldn't afford to raise. Sarah's face flushed. I was following company policy. Mrs. Henderson's grandson died, Thomas said quietly. The surgery was delayed too long while she tried to raise the money. She quit the day after his funeral. I paid for that funeral, by the way, though she never knew it was me. He stood, walking to the window that overlooked the sales floor below. I've been paying for a lot of things: medical bills for staff members, school uniforms for their children, rent when someone was about to be evicted, always anonymously, always through third parties, because I learned something Margaret knew instinctively. Wealth means nothing if it doesn't lift others. Why didn't you just reveal yourself sooner? Asked Richard Harries, the head of sales. Why the charade? Because I needed to see who you really were, Thomas replied. Money changes people, but it mostly reveals them. When you thought I was powerless, you showed me your true selves. Some of you were kind, despite thinking I could do nothing for you. Others were cruel because they thought I couldn't fight back. He returned to his seat, pulling out a folder. I've made some decisions. First, the cleaning staff's salary will be doubled, effective immediately. They'll also receive the same health benefits as management, including private health care for their families. Gasps echoed around the table. Second, we're instituting what I call the dignity protocol. Any employee, regardless of position, who belittles, mocks, or treats another employee as lesser will face immediate disciplinary action. 3 strikes and you're gone, no matter who you are or how much you sell. That's ridiculous, Sarah burst out. You can't police every interaction. Miss Mitchell, Thomas interrupted, his voice steel wrapped in velvet. I've watched you for 2 years. I've seen you flirt with married men for larger commissions. I've heard you mock customers behind their backs when their credit cards were declined. I've watched you step on everyone you perceived as beneath you while groveling to those above. So yes, I can and will police interactions that destroy human dignity. Emma, who'd been allowed to sit in on the meeting, watched her father with awe. This wasn't the quiet, tired man who came home each night. This was someone else, someone who'd been hiding in plain sight. Third, Thomas continued, Harrison's will partner with local schools in disadvantaged areas. We'll provide apprenticeships, real training, real opportunities. Not photo opportunities for our marketing department, but genuine chances for young people to build careers. The shareholders, someone began. I'm the sole shareholder, Thomas reminded them. I bought Harrison's with my own money, built over 20 years of investment and sacrifice. I don't answer to anyone except my conscience and my late wife's memory. He pulled out a small, worn photograph of Margaret, placing it on the table. This was taken outside Harrison's on our 5th anniversary. She's wearing a dress she made herself, copying a design she'd seen in our windows. She was so proud, so happy. She believed this place represented something beautiful, aspiration without arrogance, quality without cruelty. His eyes found Sarah again. Miss Mitchell, I'm not firing you. That would be too easy, too simple. Instead, you're being transferred to the cleaning department. Same salary you have now, but you'll spend 6 months understanding what it means to be invisible, to be mocked, to clean up after people who think you're worthless. After that, we'll discuss whether you've learned enough to return to sales. Sarah's mouth opened in protest, then closed. What could she say? That it was beneath her. That would only prove his point. For those who've shown consistent kindness, Marcus, Mrs. Chen, James, and others, you'll find substantial bonuses in your next paycheck. Not for recognizing I was wealthy, but for treating me with dignity when you thought I had nothing to offer." Marcus spoke up, his voice thick with emotion. "Mr. Whitfield, I don't know what to say." "Then let me say something," Thomas replied. "Your daughter, the one starting at Imperial College? Her tuition is covered, full ride including accommodation and expenses. Consider it an investment in someone who was raised right." As the meeting concluded and people filed out in stunned silence, Sarah remained seated, staring at her hands. Emma approached her father, tears streaming down her face. "Dad, all these years, you were never meant to know," Thomas said, pulling his daughter into an embrace. "I wanted you to learn the value of work, the importance of kindness, the strength that comes from struggle. Money can't teach those things. Only life can." Sarah finally stood, her designer heels clicking on the floor as she approached them. "Mr. Whitfield, what I said? You said what you believed," Thomas replied simply. "The question now is whether you can learn to believe something different. Report to Mrs. Rodriguez in maintenance tomorrow at 5 a.m. She'll provide your uniform." As Sarah left, her shoulders slumped in defeat, Emma asked, "Do you think she'll learn?" Thomas watched Sarah's retreating form. "Everyone deserves a chance at redemption, Emma, even those who seem furthest from it. Your mother taught me that." 3 months had passed since the revelation. Sarah Mitchell, once the sharp-tongued cashier, now pushed a cleaning cart through Harrison's marble halls, her designer clothes replaced by a maintenance uniform. Her manicured hands now bore the honest calluses of hard work. The transformation hadn't been immediate. Her first weeks were filled with tears of humiliation, but Mrs. Rodriguez, the head of maintenance, had shown her unexpected kindness, sharing homemade meals and wisdom. "Mr. Whitfield gave you a gift, child. He's teaching you what your parents should have, that every person fights battles you know nothing about." Thomas watched from his modest office as Sarah helped an elderly customer who dropped her purse. 6 months ago, she would have called maintenance. Now she knelt carefully, gathering scattered items with genuine care. She was learning. "She's changing," Emma observed during their weekly lunch. "Yesterday, I saw her training a new cleaner with such patience." People aren't static," Thomas replied. "Your mother believed that about me when I was angry at the world. She loved me into becoming better." The store had transformed too. Some wealthy clients left, offended by the elevation of service staff. But something beautiful happened. Teachers, nurses, and working families flooded in, drawn by the promise of dignity. The store became a community. That afternoon, Thomas found Sarah crying over a letter. "It's from Mrs. Henderson's daughter," she said. "Her mother forgave me before she died. She hoped I would learn that dignity isn't about position, but about how we treat each other." "What will you do when your 6 months are up?" Thomas asked gently. Sarah's answer surprised them both. "I'd like to create a role that bridges both worlds, ensuring no employee ever feels invisible again." Thomas smiled, seeing Margaret's belief in redemption proven right. "Write up a proposal." As evening painted the store golden, Thomas stood alone, whispering to Margaret's photograph, "We did it, love. We made it beautiful again." 1 year later, Harrison's hosted its first Dignity Day. The store buzzed with unprecedented energy. Wealthy regulars mingled with working families, children ran freely, and every employee wore the same simple uniform. Harrison's, where everyone belongs. Sarah, now Director of Human Dignity, stood before the crowd, transformed. Gone was the cruel young woman. In her place stood someone who'd learned compassion through humility. "A year ago, I humiliated a man whose shoes I wasn't worthy to clean," she began, her voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "I believed worth was measured in possessions. Mr. Whitfield taught me true power isn't putting others down, but lifting them up." She presented the Margaret Whitfield Award for Human Kindness to employees who'd shown compassion when Thomas was just a janitor. His eyes found Margaret's photograph above the entrance, her eternal smile blessing them all. My wife believed in ordinary people doing extraordinary things, Thomas said. She would love what Harrison's has become, not because it's successful, but because it's kind. Because a child from a council estate walks these floors with the same confidence as a millionaire. Later, standing where Sarah had once mocked him, they reflected together. "Do you regret revealing yourself?" she asked. "Every day I stayed silent, while having power to make things better, betrayed Margaret's memory. What about you?" "I regret who I was. But regret is wisdom wearing work clothes. It means we've grown." That evening, Thomas met Robert, the new janitor. "Remember," Thomas told him, "dignity isn't given by others but recognized by them. Director Mitchell has your back." The BBC ran a story. The Harrison's model, inspiring corporate Britain. Companies nationwide were implementing dignity protocols. The revolution of kindness was spreading. On Waterloo Bridge, Thomas's phone rang. Sarah's voice, "Thank you for seeing who I could become." "Everyone deserves redemption, Sarah. You've become who you always could be." In Harrison's window that night appeared a janitor's uniform in a glass case with a plaque, "The most valuable thing we sell isn't on any shelf. It's the dignity we give every human being." The janitor who bought the store hadn't purchased a building. He'd reclaimed souls, redeemed faith in fairness, and proved the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's choosing kindness when cruelty would be easier. The end.